I want to get this started because it is 3:05 on the dot, and welcome those of you that chose to attend the first town hall. It's actually the second, but the first was canceled because we had a sunny day, and I don't know what was up with that. It was a beautiful day, actually, by the end of it. So my name is Lane Wilkinson. I work in the library. I've been chairing the General Education Committee for the past 2 years. And then back in December, the provost called a second campus-wide General Education Steering Committee that Sandy Zitkus and I are co-chairing. That committee is made up of members of the existing General Education Faculty Senate Committee, plus representatives from other parts of the university, making sure we had representatives from every college and other stakeholders. So a little bit larger committee. Catherine Middleton from College of Business is also on the committee. Today what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a brief overview of what the charge to the committee is, why we're having these little town halls, and what's going on. And then I've got a series of sort of guiding questions where we just want to get your feedback, your thoughts on general education. Sound okay? All right. So just so you know, for those that don't remember, in 2013, we accepted a major revision to the general education program that went into effect in 2014. This particular exercise, as far as I'm concerned, as far as Sandy's concerned, and the committee's concerned, is not about replacing what we've got. This is about improving upon what we've got. We had specific goals that were outlined in 2014, specific objectives for the general education program, most of which were met, some of which were not, and we kind of want to get a finger on, is general education, like, how are people liking it with this from 2014? Rather than wait 10 or 15 years before the next revision, let's just kind of keep monitoring it. So your feedback today, this is really a first step. This is not a last step. This is where we're gathering data to try to determine what to do. Just so you know, the actual steering committee charge given to us by the provost includes these points. We're supposed to have faculty and student conversations. This is simplified, but faculty and student conversations are priority. We are supposed to create clear policies for general education certification. If you've ever put a course up through general education, you know what a pain it is and how difficult it can be. The committee has a lot of complaints. Departments are unsure what to do. So clarify how to get through Gen Ed. Establish routine assessment rather than a 5-year cycle. Let's see if we can do something better to constantly monitor our general education courses. Eliminate navigational issues in general education. So if there's reasons that students aren't graduating in a timely manner, is Gen Ed contributing? We don't know, but are there roadblocks in getting through Gen Ed? And then making sure we're in compliance with accreditation. So there's a SAC COC component to this as well. Let's see. As far as current observations, these are the things that we have seen where the 2014 Gen Ed curriculum has had a few flaws. One is it was supposed to remove Gen Ed courses required by majors, where a major couldn't say you're required to take this particular Gen Ed. It should have been Gen Ed is general. However, there are many majors that still require very specific general education courses. Now, whether that's a good thing or bad thing, we need to use your input. Co-and prerequisites. The original charge to the 2013 committee was to remove co-and prerequisites from the Gen Ed curriculum. However, there are extensive co-and prerequisites in that curriculum. Interpretation and assessment of the learning outcomes has proven to be somewhat of a challenge. People have difficulty knowing how to write to the Gen Ed categories or the Gen Ed outcomes when they have to go through certification or recertification. The committee often has trouble determining whether a particular outcome is being met, is being assessed. So some clarification there on what the outcomes are supposed to be, more of a language semantics sort of thing. Dual category certifications, difficult courses that are certified under 2 categories, say thoughts, values, and beliefs, and literature, often struggle to meet one or the other category because you just doubled your learning outcomes, or in some cases, more, and it just adds a level of complexity. The General Education Committee routinely sends back courses for meeting one category wonderfully and failing to meet the other category. We have to really work with them to try to improve that other category. So trying to figure out how best to deal with dual category certification. Syllabus drift is a big one. I had a unnamed professor last semester who didn't know I was chairing General Education Committee say, I'm so glad we got that class through the Gen Ed process. That was a real pain. I'm glad we did it. Now we can go back to teaching it how to work. Because, and this is what we call syllabus drift, where you get approved in year one, and then over the next 5 years, people come in, they change the course, they get new, update the readings, and 5 years later, you're teaching a completely different course. We see it all the time. We see it, advisors complain because they say, hey, there's 7 different sections of this class taught by 7 different people. I don't know who to recommend my student, take it from because everyone teaches it differently. So that lack of consistency is causing advising problems, and it's causing kind of constant monitoring and assessment issues. Transfer students also, they have a pretty sweet deal because we take tons of gen ed courses from other Tennessee schools that we don't allow our own students to take. And so if you transfer here, you wind up getting fewer, is it fewer gen ed hours? I don't know if it's fewer, but how does it work?
The same number of hours, but they don't have to satisfy a specific category. If they're a TBR school and they have their 15 hours humanities and fine arts, we don't make it plug into our specific subcategories.
Right.
It automatically satisfies those 15 hours.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of courses, American literature, anatomy and physiology, all these courses that we accept our transfer from our transfer
Just
students.
those, yeah.
But we don't allow our own students to get the credit. And as the advisors say, general education is not sufficiently general. So these are the observations that we can come and bring to the table. As far as data, well, here's the thing. We have broad averages, we're still gathering data. The data does not point to anything in particular. Is that fair to say?
That's
Okay.
absolutely fair to say.
The kind of data we've been given so far shows us that yes, most students graduate with more than the 41 credit hours. That's math. You cannot go below 41 credit hours. The average will always be higher. Likewise, most students graduate with over 120 credit hours. Again, mathematics, they cannot graduate below, so the average has to be higher. The question is, what's causing the high numbers of total hours? We don't know. There's no data that proves it's one thing or another. And as far as the high number of gen eds, well, we should caution that the data we were given doesn't distinguish if they were using the gen ed credit or just happened to take a gen ed class. So you've got these geology majors out there who have like 72 or something gen ed credits, well, because they have to take biology 1 and 2 and chem 1 and 2 and geology, all their courses are gen ed anyway. So we don't see any patterns. There's no data to suggest anything. We also were given this sort of thing showing that 80% of gen ed, or 20% of gen ed classes account for 80% of enrollment. So you can't read it, don't worry. It's Psych 1010, English 1020, Math 1130. Ones you can probably guess, Chem 101, Biology 101. Those account for 80% of gen ed classes, which means there's a long tail, 178, is that right?
Something like that.
178 courses listed with gen ed attributes. Many haven't been taught in years. Many are not going to be taught again in the future. So it's, again, we had the data. I don't know what it's supposed to mean. So this data was given to us. Our philosophy is basically general education is working. Can it work better? So this is not, again, don't want to replace general education or anything. We just want to find ways to make it work better. And then what I have now is 5 sort of guiding questions that we can gather feedback from you all on big picture discussions of general education. The first question being, what is the purpose of a general education curriculum? So I'd like to, Kathleen, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to this, or Sandy?
Nope, you're
No?
doing,
You're awesome.
you're right on target there.
Okay, cool. I'm trying to stay in time. So yeah, I'd like to just kind of open the floor. If anyone has any thoughts, or if you want to go off and talk about something else that you entirely, I'm sure that's fine too. But if anyone has any questions about the current task force, charge to the committee, observations we've had, or if you want to kick it off by giving us your thoughts on the purpose of the general education committee, or general education curriculum. That's a quiet audience.
This is a quiet audience, yes. Yeah, I mean,
Charlie?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I come from a liberal arts background, and I think it's, to me, general education is providing fundamental skills that have a long shelf life, if you will. And they're so basic that they prepare students for a rapidly changing world where we don't know if, really specific technologies or very applied curricula will be necessarily relevant in 20 or 30 years. So I would say, critical thinking and obviously I'm a librarian, so information literacy, intercultural competence. I was a foreign language major, and I think that's really, really important in a global economy to be able to have a familiarity with, another language. It's commonplace in Europe, and yet here, we're very monolingual. Basic numerical literacy with math and also scientific. So I think it's really preparing people to have a solid foundation and to be engaged global citizens. I mean, that sounds cliche, but I think it's true.
Okay, Charlie, thank you.
I think it's to expose students to a breadth of areas of knowledge and skills to create a foundation. And I also think some gen eds work in the skills that Charlie's talking about, be it info lit or other specific carry forward skills. But I always think of it as more of creating that well-rounded educational perspective, covering a wide variety of topics.
Right, not just your major, but a little bit of everything.
Kind of breadth perspective.
Do you find, or sort of a follow-up to that idea of it being a little bit of everything, do you think all students that graduate from the university should get the same little bit of everything, or should a BA and a BS be different, or programs have different requirements? Not advocating, I'm just saying that's something you see out there. With Knoxville has different, colleges are broken up with different gen eds.
I heard that there has been discussion to change requirements to avoid foreign languages in certain areas, and that concerns me.
Well, the foreign languages are required for the BA.
Right.
Not for the BS, and there are
Programs that are introducing more BS.
there's BS in history, so that's a separate issue.
That is.
I don't want to go into that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, foreign language is not gen ed, but there are conversations to allow BA programs to not require foreign language. You are correct.
So there are no gen ed foreign language.
It's not
It's considered its own separate
not this
category.
school. Linda.
I'm just going to add that, of course, honors, largely our curriculum and honor system replace general education, right? The smaller classes, slightly more focused classes. But I would sort of feed off of what Charlie said, that I think a skills-based gen ed is really the piece here, right? It's about reading critically, being able to write, communicate. Obviously, quantitative literacy, however that is defined, that seems to be one of the more problematic areas of gen ed always. But I think it is those skills at the same time, because of how we divvy up gen ed now and how many, not most universities divvy up in terms of subject areas, you do get that broad background. But for my money, I would say that it's the skills, those basic critical thinking, and I would add creative thinking to that.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
Because that's actually, I just saw that reference somewhere, that the whole notion of, it's creative thinking, and that, not to use the tired innovation, but nevertheless, the ability to do that is something that we don't spend enough time on.
I'd also say cultivating desire for lifelong learning too.
Fun stuff.
Anyone else have? Yes.
One question I
Sure.
have is, knowing that students come to college with very different high school sort of backgrounds and experiences, is there any sense or any discussion about whether or not the gen ed curriculum serves as sort of leveling in that sense, so that there's sort of a common, I don't want to say foundation, but a common set of experiences and preparation that students have, maybe to sort of shore them up as they might need?
That's a really good question, because and that's a question that our committee hasn't actually addressed, because that's kind of what we're here. These are the kind of ideas that we need to look into. And I will say that there are sort of philosophical structural debates in different, the way gen ed's done in different schools. If it's a foundational thing to even the create a level playing field for all students, then it seems like you should have your gen ed in the first year or two, right? However, we also have, because of licensing and sequencing and that sort of thing, many programs you can't do that, and you wind up with your gen ed in your year 4, you know? And so balancing these sorts of issues with how and when do students get gen ed with accreditation and licensing and sequencing and scaffolding we don't have any suggestions. We're trying to, this is a long process.
Okay,
Yeah.
another question that came up in terms of our committee meetings was to kind of piggyback off not only what do we think gen ed is supposed to be, what do students think it is? And how do they view it? Because I know when I've advised students, I have many students who look at it and say, oh, it's that thing I have to get out of the way.
Yeah.
Or it's the thing
Yeah.
it's that easy class that I keep in my back pocket for my senior year when I have a bunch of really hard classes in my major. I'll go take a whatever, that they think is going to be an easy class. And so I think one of the things that's come up in terms of the committee for us is not only from faculty perspective, but students. How as we look at this, how are we designing something that students find that value in? And I think most of us find value in that.
Yeah.
How do they perceive it?
It's marketing or something. Yeah.
I guess we want to add, speaking of the developing creative thinking skills, to that, just increase sensitivity and perception. Give them new ways to look at things and listen to things, for instance. Overall, I'd say we're trying, we could argue, to increase their sensitivity and appreciation of multiple ways of thinking about all manner of things, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, creative, etc. We want them to be comfortable reading the Wall Street Journal and going to a concert and a museum.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of it is recruitment for major. Student takes a psychology course, we've never had a psychology course, and now thinks they want to be on
Yeah.
I realize I call secretly.
I realize I call secretly. There is a set of faculty that looks at a way to recruit majors, a way to recruit majors for students that may not have been exposed. Latcher model the Latcher model to areas that they may not have had.
Well, I would say flip on the other side of it. I would say flip on the other side of it.
Well, I'm not saying I have a problem with it, but, I'm not saying I have a problem with it, but I think all of that stuff is mixed in with some of the other stuff.
What Gen Ed isn't anymore, I think, and I think it's really sad, is that Gen Ed is no longer a place for people to taste new foods.
Right.
It's not, they do a little bit of it, but we've
taste new foods.
condensed Gen Ed so powerfully that they don't have
They don't have a chance to screw
They don't
up.
have the freedom, they don't have the opportunity to just say, oh, I want to take a photography course, or I want to take an anthropology course. It's just not, they've either done it in high school with the APs that were available to them, and they're just trying to get through. So I think for students, Gen Ed is it is a thing to power through.
But I also think that that's part of it.
I think so too.
Well, and I would say that in honors, what you often see are students that are hanging on to those seminars because they're fun. And that's, of course, you can do that with 20 students, and that's what we want to do. That's why you would want to take an honors class, right? Is because it's the same kind of broad knowledge or whatever, or broad topic, but.
And the more we move toward requiring specific courses in general education, the less room there is for students
Right.
to try out new disciplines.
That's right. Let's just keep us on track. Let's move to the next question. Okay. And the next question is sort of building on this idea: what should a general education curriculum include? And I put the current categories and the parentheses of the number of credits required in each category. Now, I've gone through and looked at the general education programs of every single one of our aspirational peers, mapped them out, did a huge spreadsheet. It wound up with like 30 columns because there's so many different ways of slicing up these sorts of categories. So the general question is, what do you think about the categories?
Can we make one
Yeah,
statement? Just-
one statement, yeah.
Which is SACS, COC does have certain requirements. you guys may know, that says we must have 30 credit hours, and they must fulfill certain categories, and off the top of my head, I think there has to be a certain number of credits in math and sciences.
There's a quantitative.
There's a quantitative piece.
There's 3 pieces. There's quantitative, there's the humanities and fine arts piece, and then there's the social science
Social
piece.
science, right.
And however you carve those up, they don't care, but there's a floor. Now, all of our aspirational peers have, except for the Florida schools, leave them out because they're in a weird situation. Everyone's 41, 42, even up to 46 gen ed hours, so we're kind of right there where we should be. And but yeah, the types of categories are all over the map. You know, Appalachian State, everything's gen ed. Every class, you know, can count for gen ed. 566 courses.
Well, they're looking for specific skills.
Yeah,
Right.
That's right.
And in Knoxville, they have, each,
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And we don't have that here, do we?
No.
Upper level.
Yeah, but
What I'm wondering about, besides the SACS restriction on 30, isn't there another consideration? I mean, don't we have to generally adhere to state standards regarding expectations in general education?
We do. The standards that we are going to be beholden to. If you go back to 2006, I believe, the TBRs that were put on a state mandated 41 credit gen ed curriculum with a few extra
We have
categories.
to adhere.
no, the Complete
yeah.
College Act says that we have to accept those 41 hours.
But at the time, we had to adhere to that same
The
standard.
simplest way to adhere was to adopt the very same similar categories and similar 41
Right.
credits, which is what we did. With the demise of the TBRs and with the weird way articulation and transferring works from taking those 2-year programs, those associate degrees, they satisfied all their gen ed. Yeah, I mean, there's debate over exactly what the legislature intended, and all I can say is that from our perspective, from my perspective at least, I'll speak for myself, from my perspective, the number of categories and the number of gen ed credits that we have here are not a problem, or at least have been shown to be a problem. Is that okay to say?
Sure, you
Yep.
said it.
You know.
Yep.
And they're no greater than Martin or Knoxville, that's for sure.
No.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I think Knoxville's harder than Newport.
Knoxville's very hard to maneuver because their gen ed is very specific to each college.
And major.
Right.
Yeah, and their majors also.
Yes.
So what's the maximum number of gen ed credits that someone can transfer in via AP? I mean, is there a cap?
There is no cap.
There used to be.
There's a cap on it.
There's a cap on how many you can apply to your degree. There is still a cap on that.
That's gen ed, that's AP, that's not gen ed.
Yeah, there's no cap, well, 60 hours is the maximum you can have in any of those particular non-registered credits, we call them. They could all be gen ed if they wanted to.
But back to the categories themselves, I mean, is there anything missing? Is there anything that seems like could be combined? Is there just thoughts on, I don't want to presume that these are the best categories or the worst categories. I just want to hear what people say. I don't know what the campus thinks.
Or the right number.
Or the right number, yeah.
More, less, different, around.
I've always wondered, always, for the past, whatever, 2 years, I think some people, students in particular, get confused by the subcategories under fine arts and humanities. They think there's a fine arts category and a humanities category and all those other things underneath them or something like that. I'm not sure why we have the umbrella category there. Why not just have visual and performing arts category, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, just for the sake of clarity, maybe, equity.
And one of the, just to add to that, when you're going up and trying to certify a course, you're trying to meet the fine arts and humanities outcomes and the subcategory outcomes.
Yeah.
It's convoluted. I'll get rid of that umbrella category.
And I have to say, looking at the numbers of petitions that the Gen Ed committee looks at, the Gen Ed petitions, students are very confused by the subcategories. They think they're satisfying fine arts and humanities, but They're really not, because the course is only thoughts, values, and beliefs. They don't understand why it can't fulfill that 12 hours no matter what.
And then some courses, I'm learning to students, several courses will fit in, as Lane said earlier, more than one of those categories. And I'm not, so maybe you know better, but what is exactly the template for figuring out which class falls into which category? Like, well, I wanted it in historical understanding, and records put it in, and thoughts,
Yeah.
values, and beliefs, and that's not where I wanted it, and
So you take a thought value.
And
and
then
then
it
it's
is.
bring it over if it's not a double class. There seems to be a lot of confusion.
How is it that words that start with non, like non-Western? It's like, is there not a word that could mean global or international? Do we really have to say non-Western as to sort of categorize something?
Perspectives.
Global perspective, so.
Yeah, I mean, just, it's weird.
Well, that was the one I was going to comment on, that we don't have a category in Gen Ed that speaks broadly to diversity. And that to non-Western is, that's your category, which includes, diversity includes non-Western, includes all kinds of things. And as we talked in the diversity committee, that was my big piece, is that in terms of curriculum, the university doesn't support curriculum, or diversity broadly. It's that one piece. I would get rid of that and replace it, obviously.
And I also think, other than writing, we don't really focus on skills in theory. You know, I mean, we're not saying this is our critical reasoning course or our critical thinking course or this or that. And you look across other gen eds as expressed at other universities, and they do that.
Right.
And I mean, they might be buried under there in one of those science courses or, I don't know, behavioral social sciences, but depending on what we're really trying to achieve, whether it be foundational or skill-based, it would seem to be okay to use words like it's just the writing, or it is, it's critical reasoning, or it's thinking, or it allows more categories to fit under something that might not otherwise fit as well.
That might also begin to solve problems somebody raised earlier, Lane raised the question of student perceptions of Gen Ed,
Mhm.
right? If one of our big concerns is that these days to students Gen Ed
Yes.
is something just to get out of the way, sort of reconfiguring at least the language.
Yes, having a
of
bit
the
more
categories
contemporary.
as being a little more skill-oriented might make them say, you know what, I really should be a little bit better writer, or I really should be better in quantitative
Yeah.
thinking, or whatever, visual thinking, those sorts of things might seem a little more relevant than taking another math.
Oh, I know, and then statistics right underneath
Sorry.
it. So, oh, right, it's non-Western, so yeah.
But that's something that I was hoping
No one's
that
gonna throw this
Dr. will be
football.
addressing in the summer and the fall, as one of those bullet points from earlier, some observations we had, is the wording, the language we're using to describe these really confusing.
But Linda's point is about the non-Western versus diversity, so I think a bit more substantive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. I think a diversity category or something of that sort that, the point of non-Western is to get out of the cultural mindset that you already know, right? So I think there are a lot of other ways to do that. Even a lot of other ways other than global.
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, it's got nothing to do with.
Yeah, exactly. All of it.
All of
This stuff, about physical ability.
I'm just going to pick up on Greg's suggestion about getting rid of the subcategories for the fine arts and humanities. There's merit to that because the subcategorical learning objectives are pretty vague and just downright badly worded and all. But the umbrella category, those particular learning objectives for fine arts and humanities, is actually, those are solid, I
Yep.
think. If the courses in the fine arts and all that lived up to those particular umbrella categories, that would be great. But instead, what I fear is happening is that the courses are only living up to the 3 or 4 subcategorical points, which violates, I think, the whole original intent of creating that whole category in the first place.
So you're
Something
suggesting,
went off the rails.
you're suggesting retaining the umbrella
Yeah.
learning outcomes and ditching the subcategory?
Right. Or making it so that a course in whatever, art appreciation, doesn't necessarily have to adhere to the 8 or 9 different guidelines for that particular category. But if they meet most of them, or many of them anyway, then it should be considered for certification. This business of creating guidelines and then expecting every course to have an elaborate explanation of how it meets every damn guideline is dumb.
Well, then my follow-up question to that is, are 12 hours enough, too much, the right number? When you're talking about that fine arts and humanities umbrella category?
Yeah. That would be the minimum. We've had it up to 15, right? Because we had non-Western
Non-Western was part of
included.
it at one time.
Right.
Non-Western overlaps
Right.
some of, most,
Well,
some.
but there's courses within the subcategories that also overlap. So making non-Western its own category created more confusion than resolving.
I think that was a thing.
So maybe we should
Well,
have
in
it in
banner,
fine arts
if they're
and
lumped
humanities.
together,
That was
because you
fine.
can't.
Are you suggesting maybe that we just elevate the 4 subcategories up to the same level as or make a fine arts and humanities
4 from
category?
this, or 3 from this. Oh, this.
Right now you have the 4 inside fine arts and humanities. One way to go about it would be to take non-Western, put it back up there,
Yeah.
and then have your 5 categories to do it. And
And
have it 15 hours.
15 hours.
But that may be a problem for some engineering or business courses that
Actually,
want to
in
offer.
engineering, it
Yeah.
will create, but they'll have to learn to live.
But you know, but you give a Sunday message about diversity when you say it's part of the humanities. You know,
Yeah, that's
I mean,
true.
diversity is a much bigger issue
I
than
think
that.
you're
And-
right.
And while you could do that, I mean, you send us, but do you even need the fine arts and humanities?
That's what I was
Heading? I
suggesting,
mean,
just if we were going to retain those 4 categories, visual, performing arts, et cetera, and that's another discussion, but if we were going to retain those 4 categories, I'm suggesting elevating them to the level of natural science, physical science.
Each of them.
Each.
Just as an organizational simplification.
Okay, but the learning objectives would be the same, right? In many cases.
We might have to revisit one of those, things, see if we would bring some of the general fine arts.
And I think
humanities.
that's why they ended up within a 4 category.
Right.
Thinking back to your scan of the aspirational peers, did many, if any, have foreign language requirements?
There were,
Probably not many.
there were 1 or 2 that had a foreign language built into their gen ed, but the problem is that gen ed, no matter what school you look at it, you can read through all their documentation and it still won't make 100% sense. There's always weird stuff.
Well,
Like this,
actually,
they have to
Knoxville
do that.
does count foreign language
Yeah.
under their, which category is it? Their fine arts category.
which kind of diversity, when I'm thinking?
Yeah. But I mean, there's a lot of things
Yeah,
that,
they do.
And study abroad, was it diversity?
It's also in their non-Western category.
there's not much, there's no trend though. There's nothing that all of our aspirational peers do except for us. There's nothing like that. It's, I mean, maybe the historical understanding usually stands alone, separate from fine arts and humanities. That's the one trend that maybe most people do that we don't do. Otherwise, I mean, I've seen 4 categories, all the way up to 12 categories. I mean, it's all over the place. Hopefully we can get this processed and posted and have it, let people see a clean way of doing it, but it's hard.
I think we're the only ones that have statistics in the 7th category. I would recommend considering just a quantitative analysis category and having the math and all of it put in there.
But like a 6-hour?
Yeah,
category?
maybe 6. 6 would be max. That's UTK's solution, but 3 is probably more typical. You would know, Lane, for having done
Yeah,
a
that seems a
spreadsheet.
little high.
Martin is 3.
Usually math you can even test out of them. Other genetic categories I look at, many had
Yeah.
zero math
That's
to be
right.
tested high
Surprised to
enough,
see
so
that.
the fact that we have 6 sitting there with those is a good point.
Yeah. Massive.
Has it been that way for a long time, the 6?
It was, statistics got.
1999, it got added.
Yeah, got separated out. I want to go back to the discussion on pre-regs.
Okay, sure.
Code pre, because in the original proposal that got overruled, it was no career code unless they were gen ed too. Because in particular, we backtracked the natural science course that you would have had to take something like 32 hours before you could get into that gen ed course if you came into a
Yeah, that's still an issue.
which impacts that when you look at all the nuances of that. Makes it difficult, and I don't think you can make I don't think you can necessarily say no code pre, because then you mess up your rhetoric and writing or your two sequence courses.
Well, and the codes are usually the co-requisite lab and that.
Right, but I think I think that's difficult to address, because how the students navigate depends on where they are with writing and math.
There are certain programs that, when you look at their clear paths, include like a 4,000 level senior status, had to have taken these 4 other classes.
It must be in the major.
Must be in the major. I mean, there's a few, this is not a problem with every genetics, but there's just a handful out there that are, you know, that are not using gen ed courses. I think English 1010 should be a pre or co-rec for most.
I'm just saying
Yeah.
that to try to navigate.
Or
all of
placement.
that.
Or placement, yeah.
You
or
gotta
placement.
keep remembering that you can place out of 1010 now.
Right.
And I thought that we had included something related to math, that if you scored a certain level or you AP calculus or whatever, then you got exempted from that.
I
Did that
thought
go
that was the
away?
case too, and that's one of the things I told Lane I need to go back and research. I don't know what happened to that.
That was in the proposal, and I don't remember that getting
Didn't
handed
it?
out.
I think math majors have that option.
Right,
Is what it is.
that's right, yeah. I'm gonna check that one out.
It only made it to math.
Maybe they don't.
Yeah, because you can place into 1960, and 1960 is not gen ed, so you're done with gen ed because you can't go backwards.
Right.
So you have to have been exempted.
I'm pretty sure that.
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
I would just to keep an eye on the time, and we're sort of talking about this all along. This question and then the second question here: are there roadblocks in the gen ed? What are they, and how are students benefiting from our specific general education curriculum? I want to kind of maybe combine these a little bit and sort of look at it. Just let's think about the students. What's best for them? Is this general education curriculum what's best for them, or are there problems that you all have seen that we could address? It might just require a simple fix or a simple change of wording, diversity or something, change non-Western to diversity. That should be simple, Yeah.
A couple of things that I think are very weird.
Okay.
One is that the way that gen ed is, I feel like gen ed needs to be pulled out of the majors. The way that gen ed is stitched to the majors means that many of our students, like art students, only can take like the art in their major, which is not, that defeats the purpose. If you see part of the purpose is exposing students to a broader range of things, which is one of the purposes of gen ed, or it seems like. So that's a weirdness, I think. I understand how it came to be, but I also think it's weirdness. Statistics is, of course, another issue. The fact that you've got, 4 or 5 different kinds of statistics in different departments that are required for those majors. So poli-sci has its own statistics, and business has its own statistics. Now, to be honest, I don't know that if I called somebody from, a student was changing from business to psychology, for instance, I don't know if I called the psych people and said, listen, can you just use their statistics from business? They might approve that, I don't know.
No, they can.
They
In
can.
psychology.
But
They
the problem
still
is,
have
why
to
do we
take
even
the
do it
sec-
that way?
the-
I mean,
the-
if you don't, if statistics, and maybe that tells us something, maybe that's a symptom that statistics should not be part of gen ed, that it's too specific to
Well, you're right,
individual
because
disciplines.
biology did the same thing. They had a specific required course, and then there's a caveat in the catalog that says if you took another statistics course before changing your major, we will count it. So virtually, it says you can take any statistics. But you're right.
But only before declaring
Well, we don't even look at that when they change their major. I promise you, we're not looking at that. I am not going to check
I think one
that.
of the things that the students get from us though is that verbiage that says you took the wrong gen ed. And how many times have I said, no, they took the wrong prereqs for your major. Gen ed is gen ed, and your major is your major. And blaming it on gen ed is a curricular issue that's not gen ed.
That's in the department,
Yes.
not in the gen.
It's the how can we use this and manipulate this, that, and the other. No, you're requiring them to take Psych 101 or whatever it is, and if they don't take it, they still have to take it for your major. But don't tell them they took the wrong gen ed. You know, because you could have transfer, you plump in, all your gen ed's taken care of, then you still have to take Psych, whatever it is, right?
Yep.
If it's a major required course, yes.
I don't think students see or maybe they don't have the permission to carry things from one class to the other. So how can English 1010 help me with social 12? Never interested. Nor do social 12 use the, then you take English 1010 and you should be able to do this. Okay? I just don't think we give them permission.
I mean, just from personal experience, I've had students who've taken like a principal's econ class, now it's class with me, and said, can I include this in my political science paper? Yeah, I think your political science paper, that'd be great.
I mean, I had a
About
director
fiscal
come one
policy.
time ask me if he could use what he learned in one class in my class, and I'm like, I sure hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
But that silo effect
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
I
You
think
know,
is
it's
very
the,
real.
no, this is English, and this
Wow.
is psych, and this is political science, and neither the twain shall meet.
Yeah, for a while.
Going, I guess this goes back to the philosophy, the first question, but in terms of roadblocks, is there a potential for some gen ed courses perhaps to be too hard and therefore kind of defeat the purpose of what they're aiming to achieve because they're just, you know, maybe some elements that are a bit much? That's a question, honestly.
Should they all be 1,000, 2,000?
That,
And what does that mean?
that's an open question. Should there be 3,000, 4,000 level gen eds, which I believe the initial 2013 committee said, no, there should not be, yet we still have them.
Because they got grandfathered
They got
in.
grandfathered in.
But
There's
there's
less
a
than there used
reason,
to be.
Yes.
and it's the 120 damn hour
Yeah.
rule. We're scrambling to put 1/3 of their education at the upper division, right? And it's really helpful to have gen ed classes that are offered at that level.
But I think there's also some classes where, I've seen it myself, where, which kind of goes to your point of certain classes that are, again, a little bit major specific. So, you know, if I want students to take, say, an introductory economics course, I want it to be gen ed, but I also want it to be enough information for students who are in the College of Business to use that in later courses. And how do I cover all of that at a level that is both is appropriate for gen ed? And I think stats, we have the same problem. I think there's a lot of different classes that have that same problem of balancing, even in 1,000 and 2,000 level classes, I think we see it. And I wonder if some of that, like you said, we're trying to shove classes that, particularly if certain colleges and certain majors have so many requirements coming from maybe an external accreditor. How do you get it all in 120 hours, particularly if you can't double count, pardon the phrasing, but to double count in a category, oh, and it's a major course, and shove it all into 120? I don't know.
There's your roadblock.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
But 120 is pretty standard.
That's absolutely
so-
standard. Other colleges have done this all over the place. Come on.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
We
so
just went from 128 to 120.
I mean, to kind of, like Karen's point though, was, you know, we have to step back and say, is this a gen ed problem or a curriculum problem? You know, because is gen ed the reason that it's hard to get 120 on time, or is it, or to come in at 120, or is it the curriculum? You know, because there are certain majors out there that are coming in just 121, you know, I mean, they're doing it, so possible, but that's more data we have to get.
Pretty wide range of powers required to fill a lot of majors.
Right.
You've got majors, BA majors, sometimes some of them are 30 out.
Yeah.
And you go all the way up to 39 for BA, and beyond that for BA, for obvious reasons. But,
Yeah.
and then engineering.
You can
So I don't know that you can talk generally about a curriculum problem as separate. You can talk about curriculum problems, I mean,
Yeah.
multiple ones, several different ones, but the 40 or 41 hours of gen ed is not the road.
Well, we don't have any data to say that it is. When we look at the number of, we've got all the majors broken out by how many gen eds are they averaging, how many courses are they averaging, what do their clear paths say, and there's nothing to say that 41 hours is an issue.
The roadblocks are the imposition of number of hours, and specific kinds of hours by accrediting agencies on the one hand, and students changing majors
Right.
Right.
and getting caught in that.
My mom's degree.
But I gotta make sure that you said it out.
Right.
Okay, so I'm gonna have a hard time articulating this, but the idea that students changing majors is a problem for these numbers. But if don't we agree that many students enter the institution not knowing what they're going to do?
I hope they do.
Like that idea, I think you said earlier, that gen ed is this place for them to figure it out. And I mean, granted, there are students that come in and they go into these programs and they're tracked and college is vocation for them, and that's that, right? But then there are others, and I hesitate to say like me, because I don't think we should ever compare ourselves to the students, because if we got this far, then they're not us always. But the students that need that time to figure out, am I a theater person? Am I a history person? Am I a library person? Who am I? Gen Ed allows them that time to figure that out. And if we try to, I don't think the problem is Gen Ed. That's my thesis.
Yeah. No, I agree with that, and I don't think there's a problem philosophically with changing majors. I don't think students should change majors. I don't think students should come in decided about anything, to be honest. But what I'm talking about is when you have a student who gets a fair ways down the track in a certain major and then says, you know what I really want to do, you know, they do biology for a while, and then they say a couple semesters, 3 semesters, and they say, really, I'm a theater person. And then that's where you have excess hours piling up.
But it's not gen ed,
It's not Gen Ed.
because they're gonna have all those biology hanging out.
Unless the major that they're transferring into requires something specific, like it has to be sociology 1510 and nothing else
Well,
counts.
that's not in there.
I know, but yeah, so.
Yeah.
Going back to the benefits question, I mean, I'd like to see our gen ed be a little bit more skill-based, I think, frankly. As we enter a world that is very different technologically, writing-wise, communication-wise. I love the arts, I love the history, and I'm happy to have all these things, but I think there's a give and take there where if we're really trying to benefit the students, then I think we might be making different choices than historically were made 30 years ago when gen eds were established, or 40 years ago where gen eds were established, because we live in a different world, and I don't see our gen ed having evolved in the way I've seen other gen eds happening on other campuses. You know, we don't do anything civics education. We don't, we don't touch it. And I think that's a need sometimes. So.
Just to speak to that, one thing that you do see in many gen ed programs is for skills-based things, that they usually have ways of, you can place out a competency thing. All students must have certain quantitative skills, and it's not even part of gen ed. It's, you know, they separate it out and say you take the test, take the classes, that's
Well, skill-based, I mean, critical thinking, frankly, is skill-based,
Yeah.
it's not just, I can add 2 and 2, but
Which
again.
makes things a lot more confusing too.
Right.
We use some of those.
Well, departments had to demonstrate how that skill was incorporated into specific courses, and then they were exempt from that requirement once approved.
But skills-based, yeah, and we would have to go back and redo the outcomes to create a skills-based thing. Yeah.
One
Or blended.
Well, I was going to say, we're saying over here, there's going to be a new QEP too. There's an opportunity
Opportunity
here.
here that's.
So there's a great opportunity
Yeah.
to do a really whole-scale QEP where
Yeah.
you look at gen ed and you still do
Right.
you still do the areas that SACS requires, those sort of general areas, but instead you sort of have a different kind of, a different focus for outcomes, I
Yeah,
guess.
so.
One skill I can think of that's really needed, and I don't think it's being taught at the high school level, is financial literacy.
There was a school, I think, University of Missouri, St. Louis, that actually that's part of their gen ed.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about.
Or
skills.
Yeah.
Well, they call it like
All
personal.
the debt that they're taking on and.
Yeah.
Right.
There are other programs out there that they have a core curriculum, you know, Gen Ed 1010, Gen Ed 1020, Gen Ed 1030, that kind of thing. And we just go straight through, yeah. Taught interdisciplinary across departments, and, you know. So there's a lot of models out there. We are not committed to changing. We're not committed to any particular, you know. What we have here, and so I'm looking at the time, I had one other question, and this is meant to just be a simple yes or no. Which was, should institutional students, people who start here, have the same general education options as transfer students?
What does that mean?
What that means is that, you want to explain?
Like I was talking about earlier, you have arts, associate of science degree from Chattanooga State. So you transfer here and all your general education is satisfied. We have, or you transferred in 40 hours and you have 15 hours of humanities and fine arts. Like I said earlier, those 15 hours plug in to our humanities and fine arts and non-Western, and it's satisfied. It doesn't matter if those courses specifically apply to those categories. They're satisfied.
Yeah.
We've got them coded so that they'll go to any one of the 5 categories up here. Our students don't have that luxury. They have to take the specific courses.
Are we
in-
required to do that, the way we're accepting them?
Yes, yes, we're
That's a
required to
complete
accept.
college.
So you're saying that if one of our courses at UTC were to be a gen ed accepted course from Chat State, for example, let's use Lee.
Well, no, I can't use legal
But
because
no,
it applies to
say like
TBR.
then we would like reverse transfer, sort of a reverse transfer in to count it because it would have counted had they come in from another place.
No.
You know, to me, it's a lot simpler. We go through petitions. We go through dozens of petitions, and our students have no option to petition for Gen Ed. If they screwed up, they took the wrong class, too bad.
If they
You
took
know?
the wrong class here and tried to petition it in another in a general education category, okay, let's be specific.
Yeah.
Biology 2060 and 2080, anatomy and physiology, not general education at UTC. They are general education courses at all TBR schools, including the 4-year schools. They transfer that course in, they get natural science credit for it, but our
I say yes to that
students
question. Our students shouldn't be disadvantaged by our policies when we advantage others, and I don't know how we fix it, but it's just not right that we disadvantage the kids that are coming to the 4-year right off the bat.
That's kind of what I was talking
Yeah.
about, is that it is basically saying that the TBR students get to prove our gen ed.
Right.
Yeah,
They
that's
take
another perspective,
15
yeah.
hours in humanities, you know, history course, 15 hours of history courses. All 5 of those subcategories are satisfied, including non-Western, whether it's a non-Western course or
Right.
not.
So our only option would be to ease that requirement for our students.
For
Right.
for our
only
goals.
option.
It is easier to transfer students into.
Yeah.
And it's true even for the majors that require specific courses within gen ed. So if it's listed like behavioral and social sciences, if the major only allows, say, 4 classes from the whole list of behavioral and social sciences. I mean, it's not considered a major requirement, it's just within the gen ed, we want you to take psychology or political science or sociology, but we don't want you to take social work or what have you. If a student comes in from a 2-year school and they may have taken, who knows what they took in behavioral and social sciences, but it wasn't American government, sociology, or psychology that their major wants, take it anyway. We don't make them go back and take the right gen ed. So
It's a
UTC,
program, it's a program requirement.
It's a program
It's not-
requirement at that point, it's not a general.
it is, but it's also true, but there's a lot of different majors that do that, and therefore transfer students have more options to go within the major than institutional students do.
And this particular question is important given the number of transfers we're seeing in the complete college.
Yeah.
That's why
And
this isn't a
expect to
big
see
issue.
more
Right.
of within Tennessee Promise, et cetera.
Just to let everyone know, this is 3:59. The way this works is there are 2 more of these town halls coming up, one on Thursday and one on, I don't have,
Monday the 24th.
yeah, Thursday, we've got 9 a.m. Thursday in Raccoon Mountain Room, and then 10 a.m. on the 24th in Raccoon Mountain. And what those 2 town halls are going to do is focus a little bit more specifically on
the nuts and bolts of our specific gen ed program. So what we've got, yeah, specific gen ed, I know.
That's what I was talking
We want to take a look at the question of pre and co-recs. We want to take a look at the questions of upper level and major restricted or program specific courses, about course design, and about the process of the certification, recertification process.
And learning outcomes.
And learning outcomes, yeah. And so we want to take a look at actually what we've got. And as far as what this steering committee is doing, is we are gathering data right now. The goal is over the summer, we're going to take a look at all the different data we've been able to get our hands on, the feedback, and start looking at best practices, working with other campus stakeholders to come up with ways of improving or whatever we do. We hope to have a proposal or some sort of changes that we can present to the faculty this fall. So we put that to the faculty senate, I think. And that would be just a draft proposal, just a, hey, here's what we're thinking, and then open up a second round of discussion regarding that. So